My name is Chloe. I'm 28, and in my family, I've always been the responsible one. After 5 years of working 70-hour weeks and saving every single dime, I finally bought my dream car, a $90,000 1969 Corvette Stingray. This was supposed to be my moment, the proof that all my hard work had finally paid off. But when I proudly showed it to my parents, my dad just glanced over and said, "That's a nice toy. When are you going to get a real asset?" The words hit me like a physical blow. $90,000 of my sweat and sacrifice. Just a toy. But I had no idea that their disrespect was about to escalate from simply dismissing my car to selling it behind my back for my entitled little sister. If you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, let me know where you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because you are going to want to see the epic meltdown when they realize they sold the wrong one. My father called my $90,000 Corvette a toy. A nice toy. In his mind, my life in Chicago was probably just an extension of my childhood room. A slightly bigger, more expensive version of playing house. He and my mom pictured me in a small apartment, probably with roommates, struggling to make rent and drowning in a car loan for my toy. They imagined I was living paycheck to paycheck, just like they always had, just like they assumed everyone did, unless they were the boss. My real job in finance was, to them, just a fancy title for a glorified secretary, a place I went every day to earn just enough to get by. That narrative, that picture of me as the struggling but responsible daughter, it made them comfortable. It kept me in the box they had built for me. The truth, however, was something else entirely. The truth was, I worked in a world they couldn't even begin to comprehend, a world of glass towers in downtown Chicago, where deals worth millions were made and lost before my dad even had his morning coffee. My office wasn't a cubicle farm, it was a shark tank. The pressure was immense, the stakes were high, and the hours were brutal. For the first few years, my life was a blur of spreadsheets, market analyses, and takeout containers eaten at my desk long after the sun had set. I saw more sunrises from my office window than I did from a bedroom. Weekends were just quieter workdays. While my sister Lily was calling home for money to fix a dent in the car they bought her, I was closing a deal that would net my company a seven-figure profit. While she was complaining about her boss, I was becoming one. After 3 years of that relentless grind, I wasn't just another analyst. I was promoted to manager of financial analytics. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for my own work. I was leading a team of 5 sharp, ambitious people, some of them older than me. It was a different kind of pressure. Now, my failures weren't just my own, but my successes. They were magnified. We handled portfolios for clients whose names you'd recognize from the news. We navigated volatile markets and came out on top. And with every successful quarter, my reputation grew. I wasn't the quiet, responsible Chloe anymore. In that building, I was a force. I was the one people came to when a problem seemed impossible. That led to Tokyo. The Patterson financial account was the white whale of our firm. A massive Japanese conglomerate is looking to expand into the American market. Landing them would mean a huge promotion, a life-changing bonus, and a permanent seat at the big table. The senior partners, men with decades of experience, all wanted it. But the Japanese executives had a specific request. They wanted someone who understood both American grit and Japanese business culture, someone young, hungry, and fluent in the language of numbers. My boss called me into her office. She didn't ask if I wanted the job. She told me it was mine to lose. For the next 2 months, I barely slept. I lived and breathed that project. 70, 80, sometimes 90-hour weeks became my new normal. My personal life was a ghost, but I didn't care. This was the endgame of my 5-year plan. And that brings me to the car. My family saw a $90,000 liability. They probably did the math in their heads. A massive monthly payment, insane insurance rates. They likely thought I'd emptied my savings and taken on a decade of debt for a shiny red toy. A car loan? Please. The interest alone would have felt like a failure. The day I bought that Corvette, I walked into the collector's dealership and I wrote a check. One check, for the full amount. That car wasn't a loan, it was a trophy. It was the physical embodiment of every missed party, every sleepless night, every ounce of sacrifice. It was a monument to my independence, paid for in cash. But here's the real secret. The part they never, ever could have guessed. The Corvette wasn't my biggest asset. It wasn't even close. The car was what I allowed them to see. It was the tip of the iceberg. The real weapon, my true power, was what lay hidden beneath the surface. For 5 years, while they thought I was just getting by, I was following a strict financial plan. 40% of every paycheck and 100% of every bonus went directly into a diversified investment portfolio. I wasn't just saving money, I was making my money work for me. While Lily was blowing her allowance on clothes, I was buying index funds. While my parents were taking out loans for kitchen renovations, my tech stocks were doubling in value. I lived in a modest apartment, not because I had to, but because every dollar I saved on rent was another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. A fortress of financial freedom. They had no idea. I never told them about the promotions, not the real details. I never mentioned the bonuses. I let them keep their comfortable, incorrect image of me, because I knew exactly what would happen if they knew the truth. They wouldn't have been proud. They would have seen my success as a resource, a new, bigger bank to fund Lily's next crisis. My savings account wasn't just a number on a screen. It was a concrete wall I had built, brick by painful brick, between me and ever having to depend on them again. It was my escape plan, my freedom. They thought my greatest treasure was a piece of polished steel parked in their garage. They had no clue that my real power was silent, invisible, and about to become the very thing that would bring their world crashing down. Their underestimation of me. That was my secret weapon, and they were about to hand me the perfect opportunity to use it. The week before I left for Tokyo was strange. The background noise of my family life, usually a steady hum of complaints from Lily and indifference from my parents, changed its tune. It became sharper, more focused, and it was all focused on me. My mom called me 3 times in a single day. The first time was to ask about my flight schedule, which was normal enough. But the second call was weird. She asked, completely out of the blue, "Honey, that big red car of yours, is the title in your name only?" I told her, of course it was. There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, okay, just wondering." Just wondering. Those 2 words echoed in my head. The next day, she called again. This time it was about insurance. "Is the insurance just for you, or can anyone drive it?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. I explained that my policy was comprehensive, but only covered me as the primary driver. Adding anyone else would be a whole process. Right, right, she said quickly. Just curious. You know, in case there's an emergency and your father needs to move it. An emergency. It felt like a code word for something I couldn't decipher. Then came the texts from Lily. Usually, her messages were demands disguised as questions. "Can I borrow $50? Are you using your Netflix account?" But now they were different. One night I got a text that just said, "So excited for your trip. You'll be gone for a while, right? Like the full 3 weeks?" The winky face emoji at the end felt less like a friendly gesture and more like a prying eye. Another text asked if I had a security system at my apartment. When I said I did, she replied, "Oh, good. Gotta keep your stuff safe." The artificial cheerfulness was unsettling. It was like they were all reading from the same script, a script I hadn't been given. My dad was quieter, but his questions were just as pointed. When I drove the Corvette over to their house the night before my flight, he walked around it, running his hand along the fender. "So, how does one even sell a car like this?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Is it complicated? Lots of paperwork?" I laughed it off, explaining it was a collector's item and would require a specialized appraisal and transfer process. "Huh," he said, staring at the hood. Interesting. All these little things, they were like tiny pebbles being thrown at a window. Individually, they were nothing. But together, they made a sound. A sound of warning. A cold knot of anxiety started to form in my stomach. It was the same feeling I used to get in high school when I knew Lily had done something wrong, and my parents were about to call a family meeting where I would somehow end up getting blamed for it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something was off. My instincts, honed by years of navigating their dysfunctional dynamics, were screaming at me. That's when I called Mark, my boyfriend. I told him about the weird questions, the strange vibe. He listened patiently. "You're probably just stressed about the trip," he said at first. But the more I talked, the more he understood. "Okay," he finally said. "This is a long shot, but what if we swap them?" His replica Stingray was a near-perfect match to the untrained eye. Same color, same body. But it was worth a third of the price. It felt extreme, overcautious, almost paranoid. But that cold knot in my stomach told me to do it. So we did. The next morning, Mark drove his replica to my parents' house and parked it in the garage. I took my genuine Corvette, my $90,000 trophy, and tucked it safely away in his climate-controlled storage unit across town. It felt like a secret agent movie. It felt ridiculous. But it also felt right. 3 weeks later, I landed at O'Hare feeling like I was on top of the world. The Tokyo deal was a massive success. My boss had all but confirmed that a vice president title was waiting for me. I was exhausted, but buzzing with adrenaline. I couldn't wait to get home, take my car for a long victory drive along Lake Michigan, and celebrate with Mark. I took a cab straight to my parents' house. As the taxi pulled into their driveway, the feeling of triumph evaporated. It was replaced by ice. The garage door was open. My dad's sedan was there. My mom's SUV was there. But the space where I had left the Corvette was empty. Just an oil stain on the concrete. My heart started pounding against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. I paid the driver, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled my suitcase from the trunk. My mom opened the door before I could even knock, a bright, brittle smile plastered on her face. "Welcome home, sweetheart," she chirped, pulling me into a hug that felt like a cage. "Mom," I said, my voice flat, pulling away from her. "Where is my car?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, defensiveness, guilt. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Come on in, honey. Let's get you something to drink." I walked into the living room. My dad was sitting in his recliner, pretending to read the newspaper. He looked up, his own smile just as forced as my mom's. "Dad, where is my Corvette?" He cleared his throat. He glanced at my mom. The silent communication between them was a language I knew all too well. It was the language of a united front. "Well, honey," he began, his voice unnaturally high. "Something came up while you were gone." "What does that mean?" I demanded, the knot in my stomach tightening into a solid rock of dread. "Where is my car?" My mom stepped forward then, her chin lifting in that defiant way it always did, right before she was about to deliver a completely indefensible excuse. "Your sister needed some help," she said firmly, as if that explained everything. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I just stared at her, my brain refusing to connect the dots. What does that have to do with my car? And that's when she delivered the killing blow. With a smile that was pure condescension, a smile that looked more like a sneer, she said, "Thanks to your car, our daughter is having the time of her life." She pulled out her phone. She showed me Lily's Instagram feed. There she was, my sister, posing on the deck of a massive cruise ship in the Mediterranean, a cocktail in one hand, designer sunglasses on, without a care in the world. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of my lungs. "You sold my car." The words came out as a whisper. I was too shocked to even shout. Now, Chloe, my dad started, using his placating, "you're being hysterical" tone. Try to understand. Lily was having a really rough time. "You sold my car!" This time I did shout, my voice cracking with disbelief. "You can always buy another one," my mom said dismissively. Her words dripped with a casual cruelty that stole my breath. "You make good money. Lily needed this." I felt a wave of dizziness. My hands started to shake. That car. That car was registered in my name. You had no legal right to sell it." They exchanged another one of their secret glances. "Well, technically," my dad mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "We told the buyer you had authorized us to handle the transaction." They had lied. They had forged documents. They had conspired behind my back. "How much?" I choked out. "How much did you sell it for?" There was a long, agonizing pause. Finally, my dad answered, his voice barely a whisper. $50,000, $50,000. Thousand. For a car worth 90,000. The sheer incompetence of it was almost as insulting as the betrayal itself. "We needed to move quickly," my dad muttered. "Before you came home." Before I came home. So it wasn't a mistake. It was a premeditated act, rushed to ensure I would be presented with a done deal, with no way to reverse it. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. Just pulled up. "Where's the Stingray?" And in that moment, as I stared at the two people who were supposed to protect me, who had instead robbed me and disrespected me in the most profound way possible, the absurdity of the situation hit me. The paranoia that had led me to swap the cars. It wasn't paranoia at all. It was foresight. And I started to laugh. My mom's face twisted in confusion and anger. "What is so funny about your sister's happiness?" I looked at them, the laughter dying in my throat, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The first part of my plan had worked. Now it was time for the second. As they stood there, wrapped in their bubble of self-righteous delusion, a new wave of anger, colder and sharper, washed over me. "Hold on," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "When I left the car here, I left my things inside it. You did take my personal belongings out before you sold it, right?" My dad looked confused. "What belongings? The garage was empty." "Not the garage, Dad, the car," I snapped. "The glove box. What was in the glove box?" My mom waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. It was a gesture of pure annoyance, as if my questions were an inconvenient distraction from the real drama of her impending legal troubles. "Oh, nothing important. Just some old driving gloves and some papers. I'm sure the new owner just threw them out." The room went silent. The air crackled. The anger I felt before was a fire. This was something else. This was a supernova. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. "Old driving gloves?" My voice erupted from me, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony. "Are you kidding me? Those were Grandpa's driving gloves. The only pair he ever wore when he drove his Corvette. The only thing I kept of his in that car. You didn't just sell a car that wasn't yours. You threw away the last piece of my history with my grandfather like it was trash." That was it. That was the point of no return. Selling the car was a crime born of greed and favoritism. But throwing away the gloves, that was personal. That was an assassination of my memories. It was a declaration that my feelings, my history, my connection to the man who had believed in me when no one else did, meant nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was just clutter in their way. We didn't know," my father stammered, the words hollow and pathetic. "Exactly," I said, my voice now devoid of all emotion, replaced by a terrifying calm. "You didn't know. You never bothered to ask. You never bothered to care about what was actually important to me. This isn't just about the money anymore. This isn't just about the car. This is about you erasing me." At this point, I don't even know what word describes this feeling anymore. If you're feeling as outraged as I am right now, help me out and comment one word to describe what my family did. because I stood there, looking at their panicked faces, and I realized that the naive daughter who had craved their approval was gone. She had died in that moment, and in her place, something cold and resolute had been born. My grief was turning into fuel, and I was about to start an engine they never even knew existed. The shouting stopped. The raw, ragged screaming that had torn through my throat, it just vanished. In its place, a profound and terrifying silence fell over the room. I looked at my parents' faces, distorted by panic and confusion, and I felt nothing. The searing pain, the volcanic rage, the crushing weight of betrayal. It was all still there, but it had been superheated, compressed into a single dense point of energy deep inside my chest. It was no longer a wild, uncontrolled fire. It was now a laser, precise, focused, and cold. In that silence, a lifetime of smaller hurts, of tiny dismissals and casual injustices, all clicked into place. It wasn't just about the car. It wasn't even just about my grandpa's gloves. It was about my 21st birthday cake with Lily's name in bigger letters. It was about my dad telling me to learn to be independent when I asked for a small loan, just months before he bought Lily a brand new car. It was about my mom calling me dramatic when I cried over my first real heartbreak. All of it. It was a pattern, a system, and I had been a willing participant, always forgiving, always understanding, always hoping that this time they would finally see me. And in that living room, under the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock, I finally understood. They would never change. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. This is who they were. To them, I was not a daughter. I was a resource, a utility, the reliable, strong foundation that existed to support the beautiful, fragile structure that was my sister. And you don't ask a foundation for permission. You just build on it. You just take from it until it cracks. I saw the rest of my life flash before my eyes, a future filled with more of the same. More sacrifices on my end, more bailouts for Lily, more casual dismissals of my feelings, all wrapped up in the suffocating blanket of family. And a voice inside my head, a voice that was calm and clear and absolute, said one word: no. It's over. No more second chances. No more benefit of the doubt. This ends. Now. The grief was still there, a sharp ache for the family I wished I had, but it was no longer in charge. The pain was now just information. Data. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to close a case that had been open for 28 years. Case closed. The verdict was in. And now, it was time for sentencing. I looked at my parents, who were now starting to stammer apologies, their words clumsy and hollow. I held up a hand, and they fell silent. My voice, when I spoke, was unrecognizable even to me. It was low, steady, and held no trace of the emotion that had ripped through me moments before. I need to go, I said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Chloe, wait, my mom pleaded, reaching a hand out to me. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said, turning my back on them and walking towards the door. You've already said everything. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Mark was waiting in his car in the driveway, his face etched with worry. He saw my expression and knew better than to ask questions. He just opened the passenger door for me. I got in, and we drove away in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared out the window as the houses of my childhood neighborhood blurred past. It felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. The girl who had lived in that house, who had desperately wanted the love of the people inside it. She wasn't me anymore. I had left her behind, a ghost in that silent, tense living room. We drove to my apartment. The whole way, my mind wasn't replaying the argument. It was running calculations. It was strategizing. The emotional part of my brain had shut down, and the analytical part, the part that had gotten me to the top in the cutthroat world of finance, had taken complete control. This was no longer a family drama. This was a hostile takeover, and I was about to execute a leveraged buyout of my own life. The moment we walked through my apartment door, the plan began. I didn't sit down. I didn't collapse on the couch. I walked straight to my home office. "Mark," I said, my voice still eerily calm, "I need you to write down everything you remember, the exact date and time you swapped the cars, any texts we exchanged about it, everything." He just nodded, his eyes wide, and went to find a notepad. He understood. This was business now. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, a new folder on my encrypted hard drive. Title: Project Nightingale. My grandfather used to call me his little nightingale. It felt fitting. This was for him. Inside the folder, I started a document, a timeline. I listed every weird call, every suspicious text from the week before my trip, with dates and times. I documented the conversation we had just had, quoting my parents' words as accurately as I could remember them. "We needed to move quickly before you came home. You can always buy another one. Just some old driving gloves." Every word was a nail in their coffin. Next, I accessed my phone records online. I downloaded the call logs, highlighting my mother's repeated calls. I took screenshots of Lily's texts. Evidence. Cold, hard facts. In my world, you don't win with emotion. You win with data. Then, I made my first call. Not to my parents, not to my sister. I called Alicia, my lawyer. She was a friend, but more importantly, she was a shark. I had her on retainer for my business dealings, but I knew she handled private matters too. "Alicia," I said when she answered. "It's Chloe. I have a situation." I laid out the facts in a clear, concise, emotionless summary. The car swap, the unauthorized sale, the forged documents, the stolen property, the admission of intent. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head through the phone. "Okay," she said, her voice all business. "First, do not speak to them again. Not a word. Don't answer their calls. Don't reply to their texts. Let everything go to voicemail. Is that clear?" "Crystal," I replied. "Second, Illinois is a one-party consent state. The recording you have of their admission is admissible. Send it to my secure server right now, along with everything else you've gathered, the timeline, the screenshots, all of it." "Already done," I said, attaching the files to an encrypted email as we spoke. "Good," she said. "Now what's your end game, Chloe? Do you want to send them to jail, or do you want to make them pay?" The question hung in the air. For a fleeting second, the image of my parents in handcuffs flashed through my mind, but I pushed it away. Prison was too easy. It was an ending. I didn't want an ending. I wanted a reckoning. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions on a fundamental, life-altering level. "I want restitution," I said, my voice hardening. "Complete and total. And I want them to fix what they broke. I want my grandfather's gloves back." "All right," Alicia said. "Let me review everything. I'll draw up the initial demand letter. We hit them hard and fast. We control the narrative from the very beginning. Stay off the grid and wait for my call." I hung up the phone. Phase 1 was complete. Now for Phase 2. I opened my online banking portal. My main checking and savings accounts were at a large national bank, the same bank my parents used. We didn't have joint accounts, but they knew where I banked. It was a loose end, a vulnerability. I couldn't risk them trying to freeze my assets or claiming some kind of financial distress to a sympathetic manager who knew the family. In less than 10 minutes, I had initiated a wire transfer. I moved 90% of my liquid assets, a significant six-figure sum, from my savings account to a high-yield account at a completely different, online-only bank under a new login. The transfer was instantaneous. The remaining 10% I left as bait, enough to look like a healthy savings account for a struggling 28-year-old. The wall of my financial fortress just got 10 feet higher. The invisible weapon was now loaded and ready. Mark came back into the room and handed me a sheet of paper with his timeline. He looked at my face, at the cold focus in my eyes. "Chloe," he said softly. Are you okay? I looked up from my laptop, and for the first time, I think he saw the real me. Not the girlfriend, not the responsible daughter. He saw the woman who had clawed her way to the top of one of the most competitive industries in the world. I'm not okay, Mark, I said, and my voice didn't waver. But I'm going to be. They thought they were taking a toy from a little girl. They're about to find out they just declared war on a queen, and in my kingdom, I make the rules. The trap was set, the evidence was gathered, my defenses were fortified. All that was left to do was wait for them to make their next move. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that their next move would be exactly what I needed to spring it. The family meeting they thought they were going to control was coming. But it wasn't going to be a meeting, it was going to be an ambush. And I was the one holding all the cards. The silence lasted for exactly 24 hours. For an entire day, my phone remained dead quiet. No frantic calls, no pleading texts. It was the calm before the storm, and I used every second of it to prepare. Alicia and I had gone over the plan multiple times. We had every contingency covered. I felt no fear, no anxiety, just a cold, sharp focus, like a surgeon before a difficult operation. Then, at precisely 7 p.m. the next evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail, just as Alicia had instructed. A minute later, a text message appeared. Chloe, please come home. We need to talk about this as a family. We've made dinner. As a family. The words were a joke. A sick, twisted joke. They didn't want a family discussion. They wanted a tribunal. They wanted to sit me down in their territory, on their couch, and perform the same tired old play they'd been performing for years. The one where I was the unreasonable one, the selfish one, the one who needed to forgive and forget for the good of the family. They were staging the scene for my capitulation. What they didn't know was that I had rewritten the entire script. I texted back a simple 2-word reply. I'm coming. I didn't go alone. Mark came with me, not to speak, but to be a witness. As we drove to their house, I felt my heartbeat remain slow and steady. The anger was still there, a low burning pilot light, but my mind was clear. This wasn't an emotional visit. This was a business meeting, a deposition. I was there to gather the last piece of information and to deliver my terms. When we walked in, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. It was a perfectly crafted performance of familial normalcy. The smell of roasted chicken hung in the air. The dining table was set with the good china. My father was standing by the fireplace, trying to look thoughtful and patriarchal. My mother was bustling around the kitchen, playing the part of the nurturing matriarch. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of a happy, functioning family, designed to disarm me, to make me feel guilty for disrupting their peace. They greeted Mark with a strained politeness before turning their full attention to me. Chloe, thank you for coming, my father began, gesturing for me to sit on the sofa opposite him. Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking. I remained standing. Mark stood a few feet behind me, a silent, solid presence. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my father, my expression a complete blank. My silence unnerved them. It wasn't part of their script. They expected tears, or accusations, or at the very least, some sign of emotional distress they could manage. They got nothing. Look, my father continued, clearing his throat, his confidence wavering slightly. We know you're upset, and you have a right to be. We made a mistake. A mistake. He called grand theft auto, forgery, and fraud a mistake, like spilling milk. My mother came over and sat on the arm of his chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. The perfect, united couple. What your father is trying to say, she chimed in, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity, is that we are so sorry. We were just so worried about Lily. She was in such a dark place. We acted out of love, honey. Only out of love. They were laying it on thick. The guilt trip, The appeal to my sisterly duty, the classic "we did it for love" defense. It was pathetic. And it was exactly what I expected. I let them continue, let them dig their own graves a little deeper. "We want to make this right," my dad said, leaning forward. "Obviously, we can't get the car back. But we will pay you back, every penny. It might take us some time. We'll have to figure out a payment plan, but we are committed to making you whole again." He said it with such finality, as if he had just offered the most generous, noble solution in the world. As if repaying a debt they had created was some grand gesture of sacrifice on their part. They were so sure of themselves, so confident that this performance of remorse, combined with a vague promise of future payment, would be enough. They were certain that responsible Chloe, the family peacemaker, would sigh, accept their flawed terms, and let everything go back to normal. I let the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds. I watched the confidence drain from their faces, replaced by a growing unease. My stillness, my lack of reaction, was throwing them completely off balance. Finally, I spoke. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "You've worked it all out." They both nodded eagerly, relieved that I had finally spoken. "There's just one small problem with your plan," I said. They looked at me, confused. "What problem?" my mother asked. I took a small step forward. The pilot light of my anger flickered just for a moment. It was time. It was the moment the entire story, my entire life, had been building towards. This was the boom moment. "The problem," I said, my voice as sharp and clear as breaking glass, "is that the car you sold was not my car." You could have heard a pin drop. The air in the room seemed to freeze. My parents stared at me, their faces a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The script was gone. The stage had vanished. There was only the raw, brutal reality of my words. My dad was the first to find his voice. "What? What are you talking about? We saw you park it in the garage." "You saw me park a car in the garage," I corrected him. "You saw a red 1969 Corvette Stingray. What you didn't see was Mark arriving the next morning and swapping it with his identical, but significantly less valuable, replica." I watched their brains trying to process the information. I could see the denial, the confusion, the dawning horror flickering in their eyes. "You're lying," my mother whispered, her face ashen. "Why would you do that?" "Because I know you," I said, and for the first time, I let the cold fury seep into my voice. "Because I knew on some level that you couldn't be trusted. I took precautions to protect my property from strangers, but it turns out the biggest threat was sitting right here in this living room." I let that sink in. I let them feel the full weight of what I had just said. I had anticipated their betrayal. I had outsmarted them. "So, let's review the situation, shall we?" I continued, my voice taking on the clipped, analytical tone I used in the boardroom. "You didn't just sell my property. You sold Mark's property, which constitutes felony theft. You accepted $50,000 for that property via a wire transfer, which is wire fraud. You forged my signature on the bill of sale, which is another felony. And you provided that bill of sale to an out-of-state buyer, which makes this an interstate crime. That means it's not just a matter for the local police anymore." I paused, letting each word land like a hammer blow. "That means the FBI could get involved." My mother made a small, choking sound. My father looked like he was going to be sick. The entire foundation of their world, their belief in their own authority and control, had just been demolished. They weren't powerful parents making a mistake. They were common criminals. And their victim wasn't their compliant daughter. It was my boyfriend, a third party, a man to whom they had no claim of family or love or duty. "The car you illegally sold," I went on, my voice relentless, "is worth about $30,000. You took $50,000 for it. The buyer, a Mr. Peter Harrison from Indiana, is a serious collector. It won't take him long to run the VIN on the title you forged and realize it doesn't match the one on the car's chassis. When he realizes he's bought a $30,000 replica for $50,000 based on fraudulent documents, what do you think he's going to do? Do you think he's going to call you to talk about it as a family? I looked from my mother's terrified face to my father's slack-jawed expression. The illusion of control was shattered. The power dynamic in that room had been permanently, irrevocably altered. They had walked into this thinking it was a family squabble they could manage. They were now realizing it was a federal crime scene, and they were the only suspects. I had dropped the bomb. I didn't need to say another word. I just stood there in the deafening silence, my arms crossed, and I watched. I watched them as the full, catastrophic consequences of their arrogance, their entitlement, and their betrayal finally came crashing down upon them. The panic was just beginning to set in, and I knew the chaos was about to begin. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the room was the frantic ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. It sounded like a bomb counting down. My parents were frozen, their faces pale masks of disbelief. It was my father who broke first. He shook his head slowly, a faint, desperate laugh escaping his lips. "No," he said, looking at me as if I were a stranger. "No, this is a joke, right? A cruel, sick joke. You're trying to scare us." "Does this look like a joke to you, Dad?" I asked, my voice completely level. "Do I look like I'm laughing?" The denial in his eyes crumbled, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. The reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. "We're going to go to jail," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was talking to himself. "Oh my God, Diana, we're going to go to jail." That's when my mother snapped. The carefully constructed facade of the calm, sincere matriarch shattered into a million pieces. "No!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "This is your fault, all of it. You set us up. You tricked us. You let us do this." The transformation was astonishing. The loving, worried mother was gone. In her place was a cornered animal, lashing out with everything she had. The blame, the responsibility, the consequences. She was trying to fling them off herself and onto me, as if they were covered in filth. "I didn't let you do anything," I said calmly, refusing to be drawn into her hysteria. "I was in Tokyo. You are grown adults who made a conscious decision to commit multiple felonies. This isn't on me. This is on you." "Chloe, please," my dad begged, his voice cracking. He looked suddenly old, shrunken. "You have to help us. We'll call the buyer. We'll explain that there was a misunderstanding. We'll give him his money back." "You don't have his money," I pointed out. "You gave it to Lily, who is currently sunning herself on a cruise ship somewhere in Greece. And even if you could get the money back, what makes you think Mr. Harrison will just accept a refund and forget that you sold him a stolen car with forged documents? He's a collector. His reputation is everything. You didn't just scam him, you insulted him." Every logical point I made was like another bar slamming shut on their cage. The walls were closing in, and they were beginning to realize there was no easy way out. The panic escalated. My mother started sobbing, not the manipulative tears from before, but the ugly, gasping sobs of genuine fear. My father was pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "What do we do? What do we do?" he kept muttering. I had given them the problem. I was not going to give them the solution. I just stood there with Mark and watched them unravel. After a few minutes of their spiraling chaos, I turned to leave. "We're going," I said. "Wait!" my father cried, rushing towards me. "You can't just leave. You started this." "No, Dad," I said, turning to face him at the door. "You started this decades ago. I'm just finishing it. You have 24 hours to figure out how you're going to get $60,000 to undo this mess. 55 for Mr. Harrison and the inconvenience you've caused him, and 5,000 for Mark's legal fees and the time he's had to waste on your criminal enterprise. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with instructions on where to wire the funds." And then we left. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving them in the wreckage they had created. The ensuing meltdown was predictable and immediate. Before we had even gotten to the end of their street, my phone started buzzing. A call from my mom. I ignored it. Then a call from my dad. Ignored. Then a text. "You are destroying this family." Then another. "How could you be so cruel to your own mother and father?" It was a barrage. A digital tantrum. I put my phone on silent. When we got back to my apartment, the voicemails had already started piling up. The first one was from my mother, her voice thick with tears. "Chloe, darling, I know you're angry, but you can't do this to us. Think of your father's heart condition. The stress could kill him. Do you want that on your conscience?" It was a classic move. Weaponized guilt. The next voicemail was from my dad, and his tone was completely different. The pleading was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "You listen to me, young lady," he snarled. "You fix this. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you will fix this right now. We are your parents. You owe us respect." It was the voice of a king who had just realized his subjects were no longer afraid of him, a threat born of impotence. For the next few days, it was a siege. They drove to my apartment and buzzed the intercom for an hour straight until I threatened to call the police for harassment. They sent my Aunt Sylvia, my mother's sister and chief enabler, to leave a scathing voicemail telling me I was an ungrateful child who was forgetting everything my parents had sacrificed for me. Finally, after 3 days of this relentless assault, my lawyer, Alicia, advised me that it was time for the next step. We needed to get them in a room and present them with the legally binding settlement agreement she had drawn up. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. Sign the document, agree to the terms, or we will proceed with filing a formal police report. I agreed to meet them. Not at their house, not at my apartment. We met at Alicia's downtown office. Neutral ground, my turf. They walked in looking haggard and defeated. With them was Lily. She had been forced to fly home from her cruise, and her face was a thunderous mask of resentment. She wouldn't even look at me. We sat around a large mahogany conference table. Me, Militia, and Alicia on one side. My parents and Lil on the other hand. It felt like a parody of a family meeting. Alicia, calm and professional, laid out the terms in no uncertain language. They would take out a home equity loan to produce the $60,000. Lily would contribute the $10,000 she still had left from the illegal sale. They would sign a notarized document, a formal apology acknowledging their crimes, and promising never to interfere with my or Mark's property again. My father's face was grim, but he nodded. He knew they were trapped. But my mother, she wasn't ready to surrender. "This is insane," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You're treating us like criminals." "Because you are criminals," Alicia replied flatly, not missing a beat. As my parents were about to reluctantly agree, I saw it. I saw Lily, hidden under the table, furiously typing on her phone. Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, and there was a flash of triumphant malice in them. She was calling in reinforcements, and right on cue, my mother's phone, which was sitting on the table, lit up. The caller ID read Mary. My mother looked at the phone, and a small, calculated smile touched her lips. She thought she had an ace up her sleeve. "Oh, excuse me," she said, her voice suddenly regaining its confidence. "It's my sister. I should probably take this." She answered the call and, with a pointed look at me, put it on speakerphone. "Diana!" A shrill voice squawked from the tiny speaker. It was my Aunt Mary, and she sounded like she was ready for war. "I just got off the phone with poor Lily. I cannot believe what that daughter of yours is doing. Forcing you to sell your house? Threatening you with jail? After everything you've done for her? What kind of monster did you raise?" The trap was sprung. This was their final, desperate play. A coordinated attack. A public shaming. They were trying to use the weight of the entire extended family to crush me into submission, to paint me as the villain of the story. My mother leaned back in her chair, a smug, vindicated look on her face. She thought she had won. She thought wrong. Before Alicia could object, I leaned forward, my movements calm and deliberate. I reached across the table and picked up my mother's phone. "Aunt Mary?" I said, my voice as pleasant and sweet as honey. "It's Chloe. I'm so glad you called." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Chloe?" "The one and only," I said cheerfully. "Listen, since you're so invested in this family matter, I thought you'd appreciate having all the facts. I'm emailing you a copy of the draft police report my lawyer has prepared. It details the charges of grand theft auto, wire fraud, and forgery. You'll find it makes for some fascinating reading. I just want to make sure you're fully informed before you continue making accusations." I could hear a faint gasp. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice hardening just enough to let her know the sweet act was over, "that $60,000 barely covers the financial damages. It doesn't even begin to cover the emotional distress, or the fact that they threw out the last physical memento I had of my own grandfather. So, if you feel my parents are being treated unfairly, please feel free to start a GoFundMe. I'm sure the whole family would love to chip in to help pay for their legal defense. But let me be crystal clear. This discussion is over. Any further contact from you or anyone else you recruit will be considered harassment and will be forwarded directly to my legal counsel. Do you understand me?" I didn't wait for an answer. I ended the call and placed the phone gently back on the table in front of my mother. I looked at her stunned face, at Lily's expression of pure shock, and at my father, who was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. The smugness was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was the stark, undeniable truth. Their army was gone. Their tactics were useless. I had called their bluff, and they had nothing left to play. "Now," I said, turning to Alicia, "I believe my parents were about to sign the agreement." After the papers were signed, a heavy, defeated silence filled the conference room. My parents looked like empty shells, the arrogance and defiance completely drained out of them. Lily was staring daggers at me, her face a mixture of hatred and disbelief. As we got up to leave, my mother made one last, desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control. "So," she said, her voice raspy, "we'll see you for dinner on Sunday? To start moving past this." It was an incredible statement. After committing multiple felonies, after being legally cornered and forced into a settlement, she still expected things to just reset. She expected Sunday dinner. She expected me to show up and play my part in the fiction of their happy family, as if the past week had just been a bad dream. I stopped at the door and turned to face her. I looked at each of them, my mother, my father, my sister. I wanted to burn this final image into my memory. "No," I said, my voice calm and final. "You won't be seeing me on Sunday. You won't be seeing me at all for a very long time." "What do you mean?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I mean, this is over," I stated, drawing a line in the sand, not with anger but with absolute clarity. "The dynamic we've had our entire lives, it ends today. I am no longer your emergency contact. I am no longer your financial safety net. I am no longer the person you call to clean up your messes. You are on your own now. Your problems are yours to solve. Your feelings are yours to manage. You have lost the privilege of having me in your lives." "You can't do that," Lily spat, finally speaking. "We're your family." "Family," I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "A family doesn't steal from you. A family doesn't lie to you. A family doesn't throw away its most precious memories like they're garbage. You haven't acted like my family, so I'm no longer going to treat you like you are." I turned to leave again, but my mother's voice stopped me one last time. "Chloe, please," she begged, tears welling up in her eyes. "Don't do this. We're sorry." "I'm sure you are sorry," I replied, not even turning around. "You're sorry you got caught. When you're ready to be sorry for what you actually did, maybe then we can talk. Until then, do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my apartment. We have nothing more to say." I walked out of that room and didn't look back. As the heavy office door clicked shut behind me, It felt like the closing of a tomb. I had just buried a huge part of my life. The part that was always trying, always hoping, always being let down. And in its place, I felt a strange and exhilarating sense of lightness. It was the feeling of freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their chaos. I had chosen myself. I had prioritized my own well-being over their comfort. It was a powerful, terrifying, and necessary moment. If you support this powerful decision she made, leave a emoji in the comments to send her strength on this new journey. The days that followed were a strange mix of quiet and activity. The first thing I did when I got home was go through my phone. My mother's contact photo, a smiling picture from a family vacation years ago, stared back at me. I hesitated for a second, a pang of old habit, of filial duty, echoing in my chest. Then I pressed the button. Block. My father. Block. Aunt Sylvia. Block. Aunt Mary. Block. One by one, I severed the toxic lines of communication. It felt like I was methodically amputating diseased limbs to save the rest of my body. The silence that followed was deafening at first. For my entire adult life, my phone had been a conduit for their needs, their dramas, their demands. Now, it was just quiet. The peace was unsettling before it became comforting. During that time, I learned a profound lesson. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when the world is falling apart. My biological family had failed the test in the most spectacular way possible, but my chosen family, they were just getting started. Mark was my rock. He never once said, "I told you so." He never made it about his car or his money. He made it about me. He was the one who sat with me in silence when I didn't want to talk. He was the one who ordered my favorite takeout when he knew I hadn't eaten. He was the one who, a week later, took me to a classic car show just to see me smile again. He wasn't just my boyfriend, he was my partner. He saw the queen I was becoming and wasn't intimidated. He just held my crown for me while I fought the battle. Then there was my Uncle George, my grandfather's younger brother. He was the only member of my father's side of the family I had ever felt a real connection to. After the confrontation, I called him. I needed to tell someone in the family who might actually understand. I laid out the whole ugly story, expecting him to be shocked, maybe even to try and broker peace. His reaction floored me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he said, his voice thick with emotion, "They threw away his gloves?" "Yes," I whispered. "That does it," he said, his voice turning hard as steel. "Your grandfather would be absolutely disgusted, Chloe. What they did was not just wrong, it was a desecration of his memory. You did the right thing. You did exactly the right thing. Don't you let anyone tell you otherwise. From now on, if you need anything, you call me. You are your grandfather's legacy, and I'll be damned if I let them tarnish it." His words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. It was the validation I had craved from my own father my entire life, coming from the one man who truly understood what I had lost. And of course, there was Alicia. She was more than just a lawyer. After the papers were signed and the money transfer was initiated, she called me. "Okay, the legal part is done," she said. "Now for the human part. How are you?" It was the first time someone had asked me that question, and I felt they actually wanted to know the answer. We talked for an hour, not about the case, but about the emotional fallout, about the grief of mourning a family that was still alive. She told me I was one of the strongest people she had ever met. Coming from a woman who fought dragons for a living, it meant the world. Mark, Uncle George, Alicia, they were my real family. A family built not on obligation or accident of birth, but on a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and genuine care. They were the ones who saw my worth, not as a utility, but as a person. They didn't try to dim my light so someone else could shine brighter. They just brought their own lights and stood beside me, making everything brighter. The fortress I had built to protect myself was no longer just a defensive structure. It was becoming a home, and I was finally inviting the right people inside. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I knew I wouldn't be walking it alone. 6 months. That's how long it's been since the day my old life ended and my new one began. It's funny how time works. Those 3 days of confrontation felt like an eternity, but the last 6 months have flown by in a blur of positive change. My promotion to vice president was confirmed the week after the incident, and with the promotion came a substantial raise and a bonus that made my previous savings look small. The first thing I did wasn't to buy something extravagant. It was to solidify my freedom. I bought a penthouse condo overlooking Lake Michigan, a place that was mine and mine alone. A fortress of solitude with a hell of a view. Every morning now, I wake up to the sun glinting off the water. The silence isn't heavy anymore. It's peaceful. Sometimes on a clear evening, I'll take my Corvette, my real one, for a drive along the shore. The rumble of that V8 engine is the sound of my heartbeat, strong and steady. It's no longer just a trophy of my hard work. It's a symbol of my liberation. It's the car that drove me away from a life that was slowly killing me and delivered me to this one. And one more thing. Mr. Harrison, the collector, was so impressed with how Mark and I handled the situation that he helped us track down the buyer of the replica's interior parts. A week after the settlement, a small, insured package arrived at my door. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, were my grandfather's driving gloves. They were safe. They were home. The consequences for my family were exactly as Alicia predicted, swift and severe. The home equity loan gutted their finances. My father, now in his late 60s, had to take a weekend job as a greeter at a hardware store to make ends meet. My mother had to sell not just her jewelry, but also her car. They kept the house, but just barely. The biggest blow, however, wasn't financial, it was social. After my confrontation with Aunt Mary, the story spread through the family like wildfire. But it wasn't the twisted, victim-blaming version my mother had intended. It was the truth. Uncle George made sure of that. My parents weren't seen as victims of an ungrateful daughter anymore. They were seen as what they were, fools who had committed a crime out of arrogance and paid the price. They were isolated, their social standing within their own family shattered. The biggest change, however, was in Lily. With the bank of Mom and Dad officially closed, she was thrown into the deep end of the real world without a life jacket. For the first time in her 24 years, she had to be an adult. She was forced to get a second job, waiting tables at night after her day job as a receptionist. She had to learn how to budget, how to pay bills on time, and how to live within her means. The world, it turned out, was not her personal ATM. About 2 months ago, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. It was Lily. Her voice was different, quieter. All the entitlement, all the bratty confidence was gone. She didn't ask for money. She didn't complain. She asked for advice. She wanted to know how I started saving, how I built my credit score, and how I managed to get ahead. And then she said the words I never thought I would hear. Chloe, I'm sorry. I was a selfish, spoiled brat. What we did to you, it was unforgivable. I get it now. I'm so sorry. It wasn't a performance. There were no tears, no drama. It was the quiet, exhausted sincerity of someone who had finally hit rock bottom and was starting the long, hard climb back up. I agreed to meet her for coffee. I set clear boundaries beforehand. We would not talk about our parents, and there would be no requests for money. She agreed. We met, and for the first time, I felt like I was talking to a sister, not a rival. Our relationship isn't fixed. It may never be what it could have been. But we're building something new, something based not on a shared past of inequality, but on a shared hope for a better, more honest future. Looking back, the entire ordeal taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. For years, I thought family was a non-negotiable contract you were born into, a bond of blood that demanded loyalty, no matter the cost. I was wrong. True family isn't about blood. It's about respect. It's about who waters your roots instead of trying to cut you down. It's about who stands with you in the storm, not who creates it. My chosen family, Mark, Uncle George, Alicia, they taught me that. I had to lose the family I was given to finally appreciate the family I had built. I had to burn my old life to the ground to clear the way for a new one to grow. And from the ashes, something strong and beautiful, and most importantly, mine has finally begun to bloom. This journey has been incredibly difficult, but it has led me here, to a place of peace, strength, and self-respect. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family members who took you for granted? How did you navigate that painful but necessary conversation? Share your experience in the comments below. You're not alone in this. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because everyone deserves to hear stories about finding their own voice and reclaiming their power.